this is a great week to be thinking about your liver, because I have a feeling tomorrow, 4th of July, whether you are drinking because you think the United States is going down the toilet, or you're just drinking because you're out on a nice boat that your friends own. Best way to have a boat is your friends own it, not you. Then your liver is going to
Bust out
need
another 1,000.
There you go. So go to getliverhelp.com/Alison. I am taking both of these right now. Okay. This is the liver support supplement. I'll read the ingredients to you right now. L-cysteine, turmeric, beetroot powder, glycine, dandelion powder, artichoke extract, ginger powder, milk thistle, organic alfalfa, and bioperine, which is black pepper. Okay, it's all natural ingredients developed by naturopathic physicians, allopathic physicians to support your liver. A lot of us are eating too many carbs, too many processed foods, too much sugar. I have transitioned off of all of that stuff, actually, but I did a lot of damage to my body over the years of eating sugar. I used to make cookies after dinner all the time. And so anyway, I'm glad to have a supplement that helps me detox. I've also taken the omega-3 fish supplement. You get it for free with the liver support. Getliverhelp.com/Alison. It's going to help you flush toxins, cleanse your liver, helps you with energy, improves digestion, enriches your nutrient intake. If you're having issues, like you might have started eating good foods, but you're not able to absorb them. And it will help with any skin issues too. So go check it out and let me know what you think. Getliverhelp.com/Alison. So, as far as this topic, actually, wait, before I go any further, I want to make sure you guys know, you can also send me real mail to my P.O. Box 3355, Denellen, Florida, 34432. I love getting the mail. Thanks everybody who sends me notes of encouragement, seeds of vegetables that will actually grow in Florida instead of my dead garden. Nothing creepy, nothing edible, please. The producers do open the packages. We love seeing the smile on their faces when they get to go to the P.O. Box and see what you guys have written. So thank you so much for that. Bill, as somebody from the mainstream news, I am noticing a little bit of erratic reporting on this particular topic. And we're going to get into that in a second. Fire here is tweeting, breaking, should the government have the power to dictate the opinions you see on social media? If you said hell no, then we've got good news. The Supreme Court agrees. This is not entirely true. In fact, this is not actually close to even being true because actually the Supreme Court just said we're not going to decide basically anything about these particular cases. We're going to talk about, they just are making the lower courts go back and redo their homework. And just to set the foundation here, these are two cases against Texas and Florida filed by digital companies saying that the laws passed several years ago, essentially they were sold to people by like the governors of both Florida and Texas saying, we're going to tell the tech companies they cannot censor speech based on political beliefs. And these companies are like, wait a second, you can't tell us what to do, which is funny because that's what people like me have been saying for a long time. Like, we don't want the government telling the tech companies what they have to do. So it's confusing because I think there were a lot of people who celebrated like, oh, Florida and Texas are trying to protect free speech, which is what these government officials have been saying. But honestly, if you're somebody who's genuinely and ardently against the government intruding on speech, you're going to say, actually, even though I would love it for the tech companies to not do this, I don't want governors of states to dictate what the tech companies can and cannot do, because it's kind of the same as what the Biden administration was doing, except for behind the scenes, which is just forcing the tech companies to do what they wanted them to do. So it's like, okay, it may be in benefit to you, but do you really want the government to do this? So that's what these particular laws are. The one that I was talking about, what it was like last week, was the Supreme Court case, Missouri v. Biden, which was kicked up because of the plaintiffs are two doctors, and they were saying that their content was censored during the pandemic. One of those doctors was on my show, and one of those videos was on my show, which is part of the case. And the Supreme Court basically said, you guys don't have any standing. You haven't proved, in other words, that you were injured by this. And so, if you can't prove standing, you don't have a right to sue. So they tossed that injunction out. And also the media was like kind of not really reporting exactly correctly on it. It wasn't that, that all of a sudden the Supreme Court stands against disinformation and wanting to censor speech. It was just that they used one of the tactics I think that courts are starting to use quite a bit, which is they just say you don't have standing to go forward. So they don't actually decide on the case. They basically say we're just not going to take this for one reason or another, and then we never really get an answer. And I mean, I guess my first question to you, Bill, is what do you think about that? Because on the outside, I'm not trying to rush it or anything, and get a bad decision by rushing it, but I am really curious to see how this issue plays out. And in these last couple decisions of theirs, we're really not getting an answer about what the Supreme Court is going to finally, if they ever do decide, about the role of government regulating speech on these social media platforms.
Well, okay, so I'll just make this real quick because I'm going to bounce a question back to Allison because I'm not a Supreme Court justice. I've never even played one on TV, but I just feel that there's a lot of confusion, and depending on, like you said, depending on where you get your news and depending on who's reporting this, it's very, very strange. But okay, so we can agree that the social media companies need to be somewhat regulated, or at least, I don't know exactly how to say it. I guess social media is the new town square. So with that in mind, so who regulates the town square? And if it can't be the government, then who? Because we can't trust the government. And these two decisions regarding free speech and the internet and social media in the last week and a half or so, it's more confusing than ever. I mean, somebody at this point, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, I just wish somebody would make a hard rule saying, okay, social media companies can't censor what you put on if they're not a platform, and if they're not a publisher, they're a platform, or vice versa, however you want to say it. Yeah, okay. Then that's fine. Then let me say what I want, and you can't censor me. But wait, here comes the government saying, wait, yeah, they can censor you. Well, but unless you say this, then they can't censor you. It's all one big confusing gobbledygook mess. I tried to read the documents, Alison. It was whatever.
Well, I think to your point, I know you're not a huge fan of Owen Benjamin, but when he was on the show after he got booted from Rockfin, he said, I would much rather be on a platform that was like, we censor and this is why, and just gave you all of the rules, whatever their reasonings are, it doesn't even matter. It's just like, here are the rules. And so you at least know what you're dealing with, versus a platform like he was alleging, Rockfin saying, hey, we're a free speech platform, but then actually, no, we're not, because it turns out this is a little too far or that's a little too far. And to his point, I think he makes a fair point about how confused we all are right now. And really just, to me, like as a business owner, it's like having a landlord. You don't know if you're going to show up to your shop one day and it's going to be locked. And it's really not, it's not a consistent way to have a business when you're in this world where just like the rules change constantly and you're not alerted to them and who's in charge. And, hey, if it's going to become a government entity because the government's going to say, we're taking over this one reason or another, then, let us know that. And then in which case, okay, yeah, it should be kind of a free for all. If it's going to stay a private company, then what the decision, has to be made eventually about is how much relationship can the government have to influence what the tech companies are doing. Now, I mean, this is such a rabbit hole because how much power should the government have to regulate any industry, and where does the Constitution lie on all this? I mean, and I would just say, somebody who's in food, in the food world now, especially going into small farming, I mean, it's not a free speech issue necessarily, but it's like so convoluted and you're trying to figure all this stuff out. And they say it's about safety. They always say it's about safety. It's about food safety. It's about misinformation safety. It's always about your safety, but it ends up just being just a big confusing mess that honestly, I think prioritizes power over truth. And what I mean by that is, like in the food world, for instance, it's really not safer to eat big corporate nasty food, but they'll say it is. And then honestly, it just makes it easier for these conglomerates to produce food versus somebody like me to sell a few eggs to my neighbor. And let's use that metaphor for speech. It's making it a lot easier. And I think it will continue to make it easier for a big corporate news outlet to speak whatever it wants to. And it's just continuing to make the confusion, makes it just really harder, I think, on people like me who are just one person, because it really doesn't have anything to do with disinformation or safety or anything. It to me, and this is my humble opinion, it has more to do with just like who pulls the strings with the powerful people, and they get to define what's disinformation. They get to define what's safe. They get to define all of these different things. And I don't think they're right a lot of the time. The conversation over at AlisonMorrow.locals.com is where you're going to get the entire show, because Tittle Tattle is supporter only in its entirety. And Ginger Ninja says, just another case of politicians in black robes using bogus doctrines, standing, latches, ripeness, mootness to weasel out of holding the evildoers accountable. Censor away government, just use corporations instead of your own Gestapo. And, you know, like I said before, I actually, like, I am a little, I'm kind of on the fence, and maybe not even so much really on the fence about this Texas and Florida law, because I do see how this sets precedent for more big government to regulate our speech. Like, if it was not DeSantis or Abbott in charge, and I mean, I'm critical of both of those guys, but like, okay, they tend to align with me on some stuff. If it wasn't them in charge, say it was Biden, he was like, we're gonna tell the tech companies that they can't do this. And he says outwardly that, that's what they've been saying. We've been saying we don't like that, right? That the Biden administration, we're going to tell Facebook they can't do this and they can't do that. And we're like, oh, you can't. So why would you like the Florida and the Texas law if you don't like it when the Biden administration does it, whether they're doing it secretively or not? I feel like you got to be consistent here on that. If you are going to get dumped out of your career, or you're going to quit or get fired like I did from the Department of Natural Resources, you may want to figure out what you're going to do for your retirement, in which case you can text Alison with one L to 989-898, which is really just 989898. It's the same number 3 times. Bill did it. He got everything and more that he ever wanted to know about switching his IRA or his 401k over to gold. If you were not following the news, maybe you didn't hear that the big hit to the U.S. dollar came when Saudi Arabia decided not to renew its 50-year petrodollar deal, which means there could be less demand for the dollar in the future. And what happens when that happens, then people start thinking about gold and precious metals. If you are somebody like that and you're interested in learning more while also supporting the show, you can, again, text Alison to the number on the bottom of the screen. BIRCH Gold's helped tens of thousands of people. They've got lots of 5-star ratings. They've been in business for over 20 years, and they're really about educating you. Bill knows that because they gave him more information than he could probably handle at the time on his cell phone. But anyway, it was information overload. If you're bored, you have no one to text, you want to text in support of the show, again, text my name. Make sure you get the name right, ALISON, to 989898, and let me know what you think. All right, back to what I was referencing earlier, the NPR article. Okay, Supreme Court puts Florida and Texas social media laws on hold. Okay, this is more accurate than the original headline that I was reading before from Twitter, and they say the parties. Okay, this is from Elena Kagan. The parties have not briefed the critical issues here, and the record is underdeveloped. I mean, that's the entire story. The parties have not briefed the critical issues here, and the record is underdeveloped. Like any other article that tells you it's a win for free speech, or, Governor Abbott says he's going to keep defending it because this is a total mess or whatever. It's neither a celebration or a total failure disaster, because nothing happened except for the fact that the Supreme Court just said we're not going to decide on it. One of the interesting things, though, is they interview a guy I've actually had on the show. I'd like to have him back on. His name's Eric Goldman. He's at Santa Clara. And so he says it's simply the fact, he's talking about the platform's right to make their own editorial decisions free from government intervention. Quote, it's simply the fact that internet services make the same kind of editorial decisions as traditional publishers and have been fully protected by the First Amendment. The Supreme Court has now given voice to that general principle. I don't understand how he's swinging in that direction. I got the sense from him that when he was on my show during the pandemic, he, I have to get him back on to see what he thinks now. But during the pandemic, he was like, well, why can't they keep censoring? Why can't they keep censoring? And I think when I had him on, I didn't really quite understand yet the connection between the government's role in pressuring the tech companies to do it. I'd like to hear his opinion on that. If I were to say, like, okay, now we know a lot more about the influence the Biden administration had on them behind the scenes. What do you think about that? Because at the time, he really had no problem with the tech companies removing people like me. Because I asked him about that, like, what do we do about it if people can't get any information online other than like what's acceptable? And he's like, I don't know. What do you mean? What do we do about it? It's not a problem. Like, and he and I kept going back and forth because like I was like, what do you mean it's not a problem? People can't get the truth. And he was like, there's no problem because the internet companies should be able to make their own decisions. And we never really came to a resolution about it. I don't know what he thinks now. If I were to be like, okay, well, what do you think about the Biden administration sending emails, saying you need to take this off, telling them to rewrite their algorithms? I mean, what about that? But he somehow sees this decision by the Supreme Court as somehow pro tech company freedom. I frankly, I really don't quite understand it. I don't understand it because it to me just seems like they punted it back to the lower courts. Am I missing something, Bill?
No, not at all. I am right on point with everything you just said. I just also feel, it's for me, I'm very conflicted because if I own a company and there's something inside that company that I don't want a part of it, then I should be able to kick it out. It's my money. I pay for these servers. I pay for these people. I pay for all of this. If you've got content on my platform that I am responsible for financially, then if I don't want it, I should be able to kick it off. Okay. It's my platform. But at the same time, I struggle with that because Twitter, YouTube, they are the new platforms. I just said it a few minutes ago, the town squares of this century. So I struggle with it. What is the answer? I don't know. It's going to be someone a lot smarter than me and maybe even a little bit smarter than you that figures this out.
Let's look at the Texas Tribune's article real fast. Texas social media law remains blocked after U.S. Supreme Court sends it back to lower court. Okay, I mean, maybe that's what Eric Goldman was saying, that because they upheld the injunction on the law, they said, hey, look, while this gets figured out, we're going to say that the law is a moot law. We're not going to follow this law. In other words, the law cannot be enforced at this point while this is getting worked out in the court system. And so maybe the fact that they said that while kicking it back to the lower courts, maybe he sees that as a win instead of saying, oh no, while it's being worked out, they shouldn't be able to remove speech, which is, I'm pretty sure that's what happened in Missouri v. Biden. Some of those lower courts said, okay, yeah, in the meantime, the government has to stop communicating with the tech companies while this is getting worked out. So, I mean, they've had different decisions on like what should happen while the decisions are being made. But what I thought was really interesting here is, besides the fact that, let me make sure this, okay, yeah, it was written by them. Besides that, they kind of, they go through it. I think you do learn about the case. I'm saying they did a totally terrible job, but, they go back to like my biggest pet peeve whenever this issue is being discussed, which is, while both laws were passed in response to perceived bias, social media companies refute claims of removing content or blocking users due to their viewpoints. No, they don't. Since when did they totally admit they do it? They have all kinds of rules. Anyway, and they're saying they do enforce policies against explicitly graphic content, bullying, hate speech, and dangerous misinformation. See, that's the thing. It's like, they're like, look, the tech companies say they don't block users due to their viewpoints. Okay, yeah, dangerous misinformation. What does that even mean? I just wish that one
Exactly. What does that mean?
Journalist, could one journalist in mainstream news just pick that apart for a second? That's exactly, it's so wide and undefined that who defines what dangerous misinformation is? Like, yes, they do. Exactly. What they decide that dangerous misinformation is a viewpoint. And yeah, so yes, they are removing content and blocking users due to their viewpoints because they think those viewpoints are dangerous and include misinformation. And that's how this works. But of course, they go back to it. It's like my biggest pet peeve. If I taught journalism school, oh my gosh, I would teach a whole year on misinformation. A whole year. Actually, you know what? I would do an undergraduate degree on misinformation. You get a bachelor's degree in misinformation, misinformation studies. That's what I would call it. If you're not on it yet, you got to get on the Alison Wine Club, AlisonWinePromo.com. Get your 6 bottles of wine every 3 months. Drink with the rest of us. These are amazing wines in their own right. You don't even need them to be for a good cause, but they are for a good cause, which is keeping my show in business. They're anti-censorship wines, pro-free speech wines, and they come from vineyards where really they're very hard to get these wines. These are very limited edition, hand-picked grapes, natural fermentation, zero filtration, no dyes, that kind of stuff, and old world hand made type wines from practices people have been using for hundreds of years. In fact, one of the vineyards the wine comes from is over 200 years old. Okay, so go to AlisonWinePromo.com. If you're watching on Rumble, we really appreciate you over there. We will see you next time, and thanks to everybody on the locals editorial board in Rockfin, because we will continue to take your questions.